think made a nice plan. That all gets.
No contact.
Yeah. I don't know, maybe.
You look the traffic circle, and then you go Cardina, right, we go Cardina Drive, Cardina Road,
Yeah.
and that is hopelessly.
Oh, it's so many. That's a standard city. I would have Cardina, Cardina,
I need to figure out.
Promenade, whatever.
I'm just almost curious how those kids are gonna be.
Oh, yeah.
Like that one I understand because they put the traffic circle, like that did the road that you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here, that'll do.
Good evening. I haven't got your new gavel yet.
No, not the squeaky one.
I think we can buy one. There's a whole bunch of them at the back.
I will call this meeting to order. In doing so, I will acknowledge with gratitude that we work and live on the traditional unceded territory of the Squamish Nation, whose people have been stewards of these lands and waters surrounding the Bowen Island. Welcome to the Bowen Island Municipality meeting of December 12th, 2022, and thank you for joining either in person or online. I'm Andrew Leonard, the Mayor of Bowen Island Municipality and the chair of this meeting. I'd like to introduce the other elected members of Bowen Island's Council here this evening. Starting at my far left, we have Councillor Don Saunders. To his right, Councillor Tim Wake. To his right, Councillor Alex Morse. To my far right, Councillor Alex Jurgensen. To his left, Councillor Sue Ellen Fast. And to her left, Councillor Judy Getty. We're also joined by several members of our professional staff team here tonight, including our Chief Administrative Officer, Liam Edwards, on my right, and our Corporate Officer, Sophie Insignia, on my left, and other staff who may be presenting agenda items here this evening. This meeting is being recorded, and when members of the public speak during the public comment and question and answer portion of this meeting, your presence and voice will be recorded and part of the permanent recording, which will be available at bowenislandmunicipality.ca and on our YouTube channel, streaming live right now and in the near future. This council meeting is an official forum for the conducting of the business of local government. We all love our home. We are all passionate about what happens here. And I'd encourage everyone to maintain a constructive and respectful tone during the meeting and during the public comments and question and answer period, and direct all of the public comments and question and answer portion of the meeting to myself. The agenda and full council package for this evening's meeting is available on bowenislandmunicipality.ca. And with that all said, I will please look for a motion to adopt the agenda this evening. Councillor Wake, seconded Councillor Morse. Any objection? The agenda is adopted. Moving on to item 2, public comments. Any comments do you have this evening?
We have 3 this evening, starting with Dennis Better.
3, okay, we can max them out at the 3 minutes each.
Okay, are you ready?
Yes, Mr. Vetter, we
Can
can
you hear
hear
me?
you.
Okay. Well, I'm here to speak briefly about the West Side Water System. It's one of your first big decisions as council, and boy, it's a doozy. As I'm sure you've already seen, it's a multifaceted, expensive, and very complex decision. From my perspective, you're being asked by staff to move ahead with funding for a short-term solution with no real agreement amongst the three LACs for some of the significant underlying issues. Further, because you've tied the amounts to what staff has presented in the 4 phases of their plan, it doesn't look like you have, or possibly even will, consider any of the suggestions of the committee of the whole meeting from last week. Instead, it appears that you're buying into staff's long-term plan, lock, stock, and barrel. However, there are major questions and issues in the $6.5 million proposal. Here's just a few. As you know, new wells are expensive capital assets on the order of $350 to $500K all in, depending upon who you listen to. They cannot be suddenly considered a shared operating expense like the staff is currently suggesting. And new wells will be needed in the future due to continued growth, climate change, droughts, demographic shifts, and so forth. Secondly, how will existing assets in each LSA, which are being shared, be fairly compensated for by the LSAs which are benefiting from them? For example, King Edward Bay's tank, Bullen Bay, and King Edward Bay wells. They may be operated by the municipality, but they were paid for by each LSA, and they are valuable assets. Third, if you're anxious about the Bluewater Park approving the referendum for $3.1 million, what are you expecting when the remaining phases need to be funded? And the last example would be, how will the inevitable cost overruns be financed? My ask is that you do not go to referendum without addressing the myriad of questions and issues surrounding this plan in writing in the form of an MOU between all 3 LACs. The 3 LACs need to agree on the terms and conditions before asking Bluewater Park residents to approve funding. Otherwise, they don't really know what they're voting for, and there will be many unpleasant surprises down the road. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vetter, and we appreciate your comments.
And we have Jonathan Bell.
Dennis. So I'm speaking about the West Side Water System as well, from the water perspective. Ironically, one of Dennis's last points about voting on a referendum to borrow money for something or doesn't appear that you've come to a decision what the money to be used for is a problem in my eyes. But really what I want to get at is we agreed, and I guess Liam and Allison were in the meetings in October. The staff presented the plan, phases, phase 1, 2, 3, whatever. We've been hashing it out for, I don't know, 6 months, 8 months, or whatever. We weren't really in agreement with it, but we finally, okay, that's fine. That's what we want. That's what you want us to do. That's what you want to do to resolve the issue. We agreed to that. And then obviously the thing came about funding money and so forth. Right? Okay, we have to have a referendum to borrow the money. Nobody's thrilled about it, but you know, it's something we have to do. But from the meeting last Wednesday, it seemed like, you know, it's been reopened. You don't have a decision on what you're going to spend that money on. So either you publicly say this is what we're going to do, like we're going to do phase 1. I'm going to, you know, Patrick needs to be here too, but you know, and that's what we're going to do, and you're going to have a vote and decide to borrow money and so forth, or it's still up in the air, which kind of Dennis's point, which I'm sure he's listening to me. And you know, it's back to the drawing board. We need to go back and rehash it, what the solution is going to be with the water system and Bluewater. So it's it's one way or the other. Either we're, this is my opinion, either you say this is what you're going to spend the money on, you're going to borrow the money, you're going to apply it to the phase 1 plan, or you're not going to borrow the money and you're going to reopen the discussion on what it's going to be used for, and the referendum and the discussion about borrowing money is moot. But I don't think people are going to be too thrilled about sort of, I guess it's my point of view, giving you a blank check and say, yeah, you can go ahead and borrow the money in our name, but we don't know what you can spend it on. So appreciate it. Thank you for your time, and
Thank you for coming back in your shoes. Thank you.
Anne Franc de Ferriere.
My name is Anne Franc de Ferriere and my husband's name is André Cholat, and we both live at 1425 West Side Road. Your friend councillors, we first want to thank you for the news release dated December the 5th that makes public the information about the past closed meetings. This was an eye-opener. Thank you. This news release was followed the next day by a news release by Metro Vancouver Parks describing the project with nice feel-good words and also some false information. For instance, Ferry Bend cannot be part of Metro Park acquisition, and Metro Park wants to launch consultations with Bowen Islanders in early 2023. In order to be successful, we think that the committee dedicated to collecting and gathering all input from Bowen Islanders should be promptly established. Yes, it is important to start by asking every existing committee, but all information collected should be under one roof, so to speak. The aim is to clearly define all the issues relating to the proposed park and their consequences. For instance, do we really want 100 campsites, or would it be 0 campsite, and why? Do we want a 10-kilometer multi-use trail installed before even considering any opening? Do we want to tolerate unruly hikers using the very busy main road along with some flocks of inexperienced cyclists? And that's really the biggest problem that has always been a problem to cyclists and the road that we have. We really want to know the potential impact of holiday tourists on the daily life of Bowen Islanders before we really commit to any park at Cape Roger Curtis. The information gathered by a committee solely dedicated to Metro Park for Cape Roger Curtis would give a solid base to our negotiator when facing Metro Vancouver Parks. This committee should be established to also negotiate with Metro Parks, and if so, it should include individuals with a proven track record in negotiating difficult issues. Yes, Bowen Islands have desired a park at Cape Roger Curtis since the early 2000s, but it should not be obtained at the expense of the very present way of life of Bowen Islanders. So thank you again for the participation you propose for Bowen Islanders in the decision-making of such an important project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, that concludes public comments for this evening. We will move on to the adoption of the consent agenda. Is there anyone that would like to pull any item from the consent agenda? Councillor Fast was first at the.
12.1 are the info items, and 12.7, please.
12.1 and 12.7 have been pulled. Councillor Jorgensen.
I was gonna ask for the 12.7.
12.7 as well. Any other councillors wishing to pull anything from the consent agenda?
Those are info items I want to talk about them. I thought this was where, when you do that.
Yeah, that's perfect. And then we would just need to receive them after. Can I have a motion to adopt the consent agenda? Councillor Jurgensen. Seconded, Councillor Saunders. All in favor, raise your hand and say aye. Opposed, none. Carries unanimously. And item 12.7 is, or sorry, 12.1.
1.1 is the letter from our provincial representative about the Mount Gardner Trail project being on hold. So I just wanted to make sure everybody knew about that and to ask whether we wanted to reply in some way about it. The second thing I wanted to do was to ask, as a trustee with the Islands Trust, currently on Trust Council's work program, they have a follow-up action item. The Trust Council years ago passed a motion to support Bowen Island in its efforts to have non-motorized vehicles only on Mount Gardner. Now with the new, having had the election, the new Trust Council, this letter saying Mount Gardner trails are on hold, I'm wondering if we might want to inform Trust Council that we would be fine as a council if they took that off their action item list. But we don't have to do either of those.
Just adding to information about this item, I did reach out to the Assistant Deputy Minister responsible for rec sites and trails to also get an update directly from the Assistant Deputy, and the response back was that they simply just don't have the resources available at this time to complete the necessary work. And so very similar to the letter from staff. And so furthering another letter to and the minister remains the same as the previous Minister Heyman, still is Minister of Environment, who is responsible for this. And so we could easily write a letter requesting action to be taken.
I'm kind of happy enough to leave it on hold, but if we wanted to say that we still support, whether this council still supports non-motorized vehicles or not, might be something for a future meeting after we've had a chance to discuss it in strategic planning. And but I just wanted, because it's on this agenda, I wanted to raise it, and perhaps I'll bring it back at a future meeting.
Okay.
The only question I would have is that we get notified if they do find an archaeologist and start the work up. My understanding is that they're missing the qualified staff to do the archaeological work that they need to do.
The funds.
And the funds for it.
They usually outsource that to a consultant. And so they got 3 bids and they don't have the funds necessary.
Okay. So I'd only be interested in, I think we can just leave it and listen until they get the funding. Yeah. And then we'd like to be notified.
Halfway.
Thank you, Caroline. Is the funding, is the geotechnical work required to decide whether or not motorized use is going to go?
It's archaeological assessment.
Yeah.
And yeah, so they have engaged with the Squamish, and the Squamish have informed them that they are not comfortable with even with the prohibition of motorized use without the archaeological assessment being conducted. More so, and not so much because of the technical merit, but the principle of the work needing to be completed.
I guess I was just thinking if we could save them the money, if we said, look, us representing Bowen Island would like to prohibit motorized vehicles, and then we wouldn't have to do the study. I guess do something for First Nations, but
Well, in order for them to make a statutory decision to prohibit motorized use requires them to do the archaeological assessment. And to make any decision requires them to do that archaeological assessment work, and they've engaged with the Squamish to ask whether or not the prohibition of motorized use would still require the archaeological assessment, and the Squamish had said yes. So, and they did ask us to pay for the archaeological assessment, and we said we don't have the funds available.
Okay. I wanted to raise it because it was here on our agenda. We haven't had a chance to talk about it yet. Sorry, through the chair. And I'm happy to bring it back at some future time after we've had a chance to talk about it in a planning context about what we want to do this term.
Great.
Okay.
So maybe just a motion to receive it then.
Okay. I move that Bowen Island Council receive. Oops, sorry, wrong page.
It's the letter in item 12.1.
Yeah, the letter from Brian Mitchell regarding Mount Gardner trails. 12.1, just so people can find it. Thank you.
Is there a second? Councillor Morse. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, none, carries unanimously. Item 12.7, letter from Christine Prefaneco, Trans Mountain, regarding the report on Trans Mountain fate and behavior bitumen research.
Thank you. I just wanted to raise this one because for one thing, there wasn't a link to the report in there, but I did see it through or I couldn't find it. I did find it though through the Islands Trust, who also was invited to respond right after the election and before Trust Council had met. And so Islands Trust had asked for an extension, but I looked through my file and went, back in, this is 2016, Trans Mountain Pipeline ran a public engagement process, and they didn't invite local governments, including Bowen Island, to their public engagement process. So I went and spoke, but there was no official statement because we hadn't had a meeting. It was during the summer, it was very short notice. And then we did write in 2016, Bowen Island Council did write and said that council write to the Minister of Natural Resources and request, that was the federal minister, I think, well, anyway, the council prepared a letter to Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. Sorry, there's several things here. And that we were concerned about the exclusion of input from communities such as Bowen Island until this late point in the process. And I would say that this letter asking local governments for input right around election time before any of them have met is another way of excluding local governments from the process of commenting about the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion program. So I would like to know whether this council would be interested in a motion to, again, write to the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion project and copy MP Patrick Weiler with concerns about the exclusion of input from communities such as Bowen Island until, again, instead of until. But anyway, we can discuss it another time. I know this is all new to some people. I brought a few notes and things. I've got its name in the paper for being one of the municipalities, along with Burnaby, New Westminster, Vancouver, North Vancouver, Victoria, Squamish, and Bowen Island, called on the federal government, etc.
Councillor Getty?
Would we like the trust write to this person and reply to this letter and ask for an extension for comments? It came late, explain it. We've just been through the process. We haven't done it. In our first 2 months, we need time to discuss it. And we've written them before in the past and shown some concerns, and that's a new council. We'd like to know whether amongst ourselves, whether to renew it or not, have a chance to think.
Is this the same, just a point of information for the trustees, was this the same issue that Chair Luckham had written? Requested
Yes.
extension about?
Yes, they did request an extension. They did give us an extension. The extended date is already passed, and here it is on our agenda now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Councilor Saunders?
Thank you. Comments I have would have been just concurring with Councilor Getty. This is not something we want to make a decision or any movement on. Like, we need more information, and I think asking for an extension to get more information is appropriate.
So it sounds like maybe there's, Councilor Morse?
I just have a curiosity. Letters dated October 17th. And there was an email on November 7th, so. I don't, when did we actually get this?
So if I may.
Yeah, Mr. Edwards.
So
In the middle of the election.
yeah. So the email came through our emergency program coordinator in and around that time, like October 19th is when I saw it. And it's a very technical paper. Essentially the issue is to report back on the fate and behavior of bitumen in the marine environment. And they're looking for a response on that. And so we essentially didn't respond and held on to the response. And we've since more recently at the end of November, we're reached out about an engagement workshop that would be talking about it. But again, the timing is difficult. So I think the point about the initial outreach being right around the election is a good one. And I do think that asking for additional time to respond would be beneficial. To be honest, I'm not sure how much content we're going to be able to dive into on the matter, but the point about the timing and earnest engagement is a good one.
Okay.
It came to Christie only work. Sorry.
Councilor Getty?
I don't have the expertise. I don't know if our environmental department has the expertise, but we might be able to put it out to the community and see if there's anybody that could help us with a response.
Sounds like perhaps the first step would be to a motion that asks for the extension of the input period, and then perhaps we could have something come back in January. Not bad.
I think that sounds good to me. I think in this earlier 2016 motion that council passed, we did encourage invited citizens to participate in the Trans Mountain Pipeline Expansion Project online questionnaire at that time that was available until, so we could invite people to have input as well. But okay, I would move that council direct staff to prepare a letter to the Trans Mountain Pipeline Expansion Project as per item 12.7 in the agenda, and request an extension so that Bowen Island municipality can respond with input.
Our corporate officer a moment here to catch up on that one.
Can I suggest a little bit more detail? So the council directs staff a letter to the Trans Mountain Pipeline Expansion Project as per item 12.7 in the agenda, and request an extension of the input period for the draft fate and behavior bitumen research report.
Very good. And we can put in like a couple of months if we, right? Because
Second.
until the end of February 2022, 23.
Okay, so can you read out the completed motion, clerk officer?
Yes, that council directs staff to prepare a letter to the Trans Mountain Pipeline Expansion Project as per item 12.7 in the agenda and request an extension of the input period for the draft fate and behavior bitumen research report until the end of February 2023.
Thank you. So moved by Councillor Fast, second Councillor Katie. Any discussion? All in favor, raise your hand, say aye. Any opposed? Carries unanimously. That concludes the items removed from the consent agenda. Moving on to item 5, delegations. 5.1, Callum Campbell, founder and CEO of Green Line Ferries. You want to come join us up here?
I had a deck today. Is that possible to get the deck up?
Go ahead, I'm just.
Sure. Yes. Yeah. So my name is Callum. I'm with Green Line Ferries. So I've been in the marine transportation industry for 20 years. I'm a naval architect by profession. I spent the first half of my career designing and building ships. And I spent the second half of my career as the director of inland ferries. That's the provincial inland fleet. So I work for the provincial government. And in the course of my government work, I go to a lot of open houses about ferries, so both inland and coastal. And so I spend a lot of time listening to people about how they feel about ferry service. And if you're listening, it's really not hard to hear what people are saying. They want reliable service at an affordable price. And that's from a ferry user perspective, I understand that. But I also know from a service delivery perspective, we want ferries to be green, we want ferries to be clean, and we want ferries to be financially sustainable. And I know from my perspective that we're asking a lot of a car ferry system. So in BC, inland ferries, the coastal ferries, is predominantly a system we've had since the 1960s. And it's about moving people between suburban terminals. And I think the things that we want from our coastal transportation system, we're not going to get only from a car ferry system. So today I want to talk about bringing new tools to the coastal travel options in BC, including here with an impact for Bowen Island. Go to the next slide. So the next slide here, this slide shows the front cover of a government report called A Vision for Coastal Ferry Service. So just before the pandemic, I joined the former Minister of Transportation, that was Claire Trevina at the time, on a vision tour. And we went up and down the coast talking to 7 coastal communities about what they wanted. And then we followed up with an online survey of 5,000 people. And I'm just going to draw your attention to one of the findings here. When we asked people what was the main factor in bringing their car on a coastal ferry trip, highlight that one if you want, click ahead. So 41% of the people indicated that the main reason, one of the main reasons they had to bring a car was to get to the ferry terminal. And I think this is kind of backwards a little bit. At one point, these suburban terminals were a convenient transfer place to get to where you wanted to go. But right now, they're contributing to congestion. And, growing the car ferry system is only going to lead to more congestion. So, what I want to talk to you today is about moving people in another way. We can advance the next slide. So this slide shows 3 images of 3 different passenger-only ferries used in other parts of North America. So we look to what other people have done. And if you look to see what others have done, they're using high-speed passenger-only ferries. And you don't have to look any further than to see what Seattle has done. Seattle has the Washington State ferry system, and it's often compared to the BC ferry system. They're kind of similar types of water, similar types of ships. But in the past 5 years, they've introduced a fast passenger-only system that works alongside. this car ferry system. There's also examples in New York, the NYC ferry, and WITA. This is the system of ferries that crosses the bay in San Francisco. So each of these systems have specifically deployed passenger-only ferries to help with congestion. And these systems work when you bypass the car ferry terminal altogether, and when you travel at high speed to shorten the travel time, and when you provide seamless integration to transit and car share and ride hail and e-bike and all of the modes to help people make those links, those onward links from the origin to destination without using a car. Advance the next one. This slide shows a map of the proposed ferry connections between Gibsons and Vancouver and Snug Cove in Vancouver. So this is the big idea. So my company, Greenline, is looking to deliver a new high-speed passenger-only ferry service from the heart of coastal communities direct into downtown Vancouver. And we want to do this with all electric ferries. So the plan involves 2 high-speed purpose-built ships for the waters of the Salish Sea and new terminal locations in Gibsons, Bowen Island, and downtown Vancouver. At a cruise speed of 23 knots, the voyage from Gibsons to waterfront is about 75 minutes, and the voyage from Bowen to waterfront is 45 minutes. There's the next slide. Thanks. This slide shows a picture of a new Norwegian passenger-only ferry, which I went to go see in September. This is the type of vessel we need for this service. This is not a whale watching tour, not a dinner cruise. This is mainstream ferry service for everybody. And it's going to be fully electric. So this vessel is absolutely brilliant. It's the result of an 11 million euro R&D project. They spent 4 years developing this boat. It's the first of its type, went into service in September, and the shipyard is currently bidding 8 more. It was specifically designed and built using a modular approach, so you could adapt it to other use cases. It's a really pleasant experience. We were traveling along at 27 knots, and there's no noise, there's no vibration. All you hear is the rush of water, and it's a really nice experience. So this boat is designed to carry passengers. It carries 20 bikes, it carries cargo wagons, the type of ferry that I think offer people the convenience. For those who are ready to make a shift without a car, this is what's going to roll. Next slide. This slide shows a sample schedule. So it's the various times when the ferry could be leaving and arriving at various ports. So I would see one vessel home ported in Gibsons. The other vessel could be either home ported in Vancouver or Bowen. Wherever a vessel is home ported, it means we would need shore charging. And shore charging looks essentially like 2 big transformers that we installed on the docks. So the vessel is manually plugged in. So with essentially 6 car chargers, that's how the vessel is plugged in. So the specific times here are just preliminary, but they're to give you a basic idea. So we don't need to do, I'm happy to take suggestions. But you can see there's a 25-minute gap every time the vessel is ready to charge. So the important thing for Bowen Islanders is the first vessel to leave Snug Cove at 7 a.m. and the last boat in would be something like 8:45 p.m. There we go. And next slide. So this next slide shows 3 call-out boxes describing some of the features of passenger-only ferries, which I'll explain. So what do passenger-only ferries do? They cut travel time and they cut travel costs. They take hundreds of cars off roads and bridges every day. And they're resilient to labor shortages and energy swings. So a Greenline ferry of the type proposing has a fraction of the crew of a basic ferry. The Bowen Island ferry takes 10 to 12 crew members. A Greenline ferry operates with a crew of approximately 4. This next slide shows a checklist of the activities that we're going through. So how are we going to get this done? From now until March, we're building a feasibility plan. So we're scoping the technology. That was part of my trip to Norway. We're working with BC Hydro. We're building a detailed ridership model using smartphone origin destination location data and engaging with communities. So if we get green lighted on this feasibility plan, we'll be moving forward with execution, which includes a significant financial raise. We look to have ships in place. We look to have orders for ships in place by the end of 2023. We build in 2024, and we look to have service ready for 2025. So where are we at right now? So we are currently engaging with First Nations. We have an open house planned for Gibson's and an open house planned for Bowen in September. And in the background, as I've mentioned, we're doing some very detailed ridership modeling. Next slide. That's okay. There we go. So call to action, really 3 bullets. So the open house, as I said, Green Line and staff will be hosting an open house at the library on January 18th from 5:30 to 8 p.m.
Our library here.
Your library right here, yep. And it'll be a come and go event, posters around the room, and some activities, and you can talk to the Green Line staff about what we've got planned. So if you're interested in this idea, or if you're just curious, we'd love to see you there. The second thing, I'd like you to consider joint applications for feasibility funding. The feds have numerous types of programs specifically to promote this type of thing. And so one of the programs is called the Green Municipal Fund, and that is specifically for feasibility funding. So it matches, it's a matching funding up to $175,000. So it provides a total of $350,000 subject to 10% contribution from the municipality. And that would have to be a joint application. And then the last, part of the thing that makes this work, as I mentioned, is these seamless transportation connections on the Vancouver side. We'd be looking to land the boat anywhere where you're sort of 90 steps from the Canada line, so people can see their on-road trips. If you have a medical appointment on Broadway, you need to be able to see that where the boat lands, you need to see how you get to Broadway. So that works on the Vancouver side. It's got great connections. On the Bowen side, we'd want to see as many possible ways to get down to the terminal as they can, so they wouldn't need to take their ride. So those are the 3 asks I've got for you today. And I'm happy to take questions or comments. Do you like?
Thank you. Any questions from you all? Hands all over the place. Councillor Bassett, shoot up first, then Councillor Saunders and Councillor Fox.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. This is exciting. And I'm interested, I'm wondering, when you say 25-minute charge, was that at Snug Cove? Would it charge here as well?
So right now, the baseline plan would be to charge in Gibson's and charge in Vancouver.
Okay.
So you could make a round trip from Vancouver, charge in Vancouver 25 minutes, make a round trip to Bowen and then back to Vancouver. So no charge in at Bowen. You don't home port in Bowen.
Thank you.
Councillor Saunders.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Campbell. I got, a couple thousand questions, but I'll limit it to one, and I'll go to your open house and ask the others at that point.
Sure.
Obviously an intriguing idea for everybody, and the benefits of it are pretty obvious, I think, to all of us. But one of the questions I've got, I don't know how far along in your planning you are. Port of Vancouver is one of the busiest harbors in the world. Have you already engaged with them in terms of being able to get in and out of there on potential the projected schedule you had, and you have docking space line, or I realize you wouldn't have purchased it yet, but is that in the works as well?
Yeah, so both those conversations I've engaged with. So both the assistant harbor master for the Port of Metro Vancouver and absolutely been talking to, folks at Seabus as well. The outer berths of Seabus. So the Seabus is, it's sort of a U-shaped dock. The Seabus comes in the middle. The outer berths were always designed for passenger only ferry service. And if you remember, I believe it was Harbor Links. Before that, it was Royal Sea Link Express. So those services have used the outer berths of Seabus before. So technically, I know it's possible. Absolutely, early days in terms of lining things up. But as I said, any place where the water comes in close proximity to a Canada line or Expo line, that's what we're looking at.
Right, thank you.
Councillor Moritz.
Councillor Saunders asked one of my questions. Can you repeat the time for the open house again on the 18th?
January 18th, 5:30 to 8 o'clock. And we'll be advertising that. So.
And then I guess you're talking about 150 passengers, so with 4 crew, and BC Ferries has a lot more crew, but they also have a license for 450 passengers.
Yeah.
33 times split. It almost comes out to the same. What the other was the water conditions. The boat you were on, where was it running between?
Yeah, it was on a fjord in Norway. So yeah, so one of the changes, so the boat we were looking at is specifically designed to be adapted to other use cases. So one of the things we would do is modify that hull specifically for the waters of the Salish Sea. So around Point Atkinson and under the First Narrows, like those are the 2 spots. And so, we'd be looking for, significant wave height. We want to make sure that we design the boat for the conditions there. So that would be one modification. We'd be looking.
Thank you.
Councilor Jorgensen?
Thank you very much, Mr. Campbell, for your presentation. One question I have, has there been any work done on selecting a terminal location on Bowen Island?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been looking. So certainly there's the water taxi dock in the cove. But I also understand there's other ideas as well. I mean, Seymour Bay has come up potentially. So for sure, before any one particular location is locked up, I'd like to have options, right? So I think, so those are 2 different options that come up here on Bowen.
And my second one is regarding the accessibility of that boat for persons with disabilities. That day, if there's any features on that boat that you had observed in Norway that would be relevant for that discussion.
Yeah, so one of the great things about this boat is it's single decked boat. So there's no, so it's a single deck boat, which means you don't need elevators for one. The second thing is it's got, it's a front end loading boat. The ramp deploys from the bow. It can deploy from the side as well, but that makes sure that there's no make sure that all the inclines are fairly level. And then the other piece to that would be, of course, getting down to the boat, right, on the off and ramp structure. So where possible, we'd be looking to use existing facilities. So, the water taxi dock, for example, it's not code that already exists, the sea bus terminal that already exists. But if it were a new purpose-built facility, then absolutely we'd be looking to make sure we met all the accessibility guidelines. There's standard for that in the marine industry called the Marine Accessibility Guidelines. So we'd be looking to meet all of those.
Thank you.
Councilor Wake?
Through the chair. I'm just wondering about the financial model and viability, kind of what sort of occupancy you need to have, whether what the fare might be and whether subsidized in any way, or at least in the ramp up period, or breaking is. Will those answers be available at the open house?
Yeah, well, I can tell you. So I think, let me counter this. I mean, Greenline is a mission-driven company. We want to take people out of their cars. The point of the service is to fill the seats, right? And so you look at what do people make their travel decisions based on? They make it based on travel time, on cost, on frequency. Now you have to look for a package that people are actually willing to go for, right? And part of that is one of the nice things about having electric boats is it actually does meet the criteria for many federal funding programs right now. So, we'd be looking to make use of those. What are those programs for, if not to incentivize things like this? Another piece to an all-electric ferry is there are carbon offsets available, another revenue source. So the point is to fill the seats. That's when we know we're doing well.
Thank you.
Do you have a sense of what level of ridership would be needed in order to make this viable? Or to Gibson's?
Yeah, so I think we'd be looking at, I mean, from Gibson's to Vancouver, I think that's the one I've mainly been looking at so far, but sort of somewhere in between 40 to 50% utilization on average. So that's the type of thing. So we'd be looking to move a lot of people another way. And so, already 20% of of the passengers on the Langdale Run are walk-ons, right? So, you know, there's an awful lot of people going that way already. So let's just make it more convenient.
And would you anticipate, I mean, have you gotten into what pricing would be per rider or what that would look like compared to a ferry ride?
Yeah, and I think that coming back to the point about, you know, making sure that what's on offer here is attractive, right? So there's definitely going to be a travel time savings for sure. I mean, from going to downtown is 45 minutes. So it's got to be competitive with whatever other modes there are, which are the car, you know, the BC Ferry, whether you walk on or whether you drive, right? So, you know, I think it's, yeah, not sure I'm not quite ready to talk about particular figures at this point, but you understand where we're coming from on this.
Yeah. And based on some of the other communities that you've seen that have used electric ferries, is there, would there be modifications needed on the boat with respect to range to make that, you know, to make an all electric run from basically Waterfront Station to Gibson's?
Yeah, so I was talking to Corvus. Corvus is a battery manufacturer in Richmond, and they've done very well in the marine industry. They've had 600 marine installations at this point. So I mean, they're by far the leader in the field. So Medstrom is the name of the vessel I was looking at, had something called the Dolphin Ones. That's the model that was fit. And that boat can travel easily 23 knots for 60 minutes. And that's what it was sort of designed for, and has a healthy battery life remaining. The Dolphin 2s, they've essentially doubled that energy density. So, you know, you double that endurance. So this is an electric boat is within range. It is possible. And that's specifically why Greenline's looking at these runs, because they're short enough to be accomplished with an all-electric ferry.
And have Transport Canada ever dealt with electric ferries like this before? Or is this kind of new regulatory territory for them?
It's not. So I mean, there's a lot of movement with electric ferries right now. Of course, BC Ferries has some electric ready ferries. So the idea about installing batteries on a ferry is not new. That's been done here in BC. The idea about running high-speed all-electric ferries, that piece would be new. But Transport Canada subscribes to the International Maritime Organization, and they harmonize those regulations, which are the same regulations that Norway is also under. So it's not reinventing the wheel. Okay. We'd be looking to essentially deploy with some modifications what others have already done.
Great, thank you. Yeah. Also fast.
Because of the timing here, and January 18th is, I'm wondering if we could, whether council would like to invite the Transportation Advisory Committee or inform the Transportation Advisory Committee about the January 18th open house, in case they would like.
I think absolutely
participate in that. And also the Environment and Climate Action Advisory Committee would be my two suggestions. Because the date's coming up quick, people would need to put it in their calendar if they want to attend that.
Absolutely, great suggestion.
Do I need a formal motion for that?
I'm not sure. I think it's just something you could email them with.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Nothing more?
So follow up to that, is this the sort of thing we would put in our news and notices?
Yeah.
So that would go out to, and I assume you're advertising in the undercurrent. Alex is here.
We're going to start doing that soon. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I can send out some information specifically if I mean, there's been a lot of interest from local organizations. I'm happy to provide, if they want to use their channels to get the word out, or provide the information for that.
We do a weekly news and notices to a fairly broad mailing list. And that also goes in the undercurrent.
Any other questions from council? Thank you very much, for coming, Mr. Kennedy.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Now to section 6 of the agenda, business arising from minutes. 6.1, the liquor license referral, the endorsement area for Bowden Cider House at 1125 Grafton Road. And I believe we have a presentation on this from our island community planner.
All right, good evening, Mayor Leonard and Council. I will share my screen here. Right. So as directed by Council during November 28th Council meeting, I'll be presenting the introduction to Bone Cider House's lounge endorsement application and seeking Council direction to notify the adjacent neighbors about an additional public notice and the date in which Council will be considering this application. Now, before I dive into the introduction of the application, I would like to go over the outline for today's presentation, just to manage expectations and ensure that Council and the public understand what exactly is being recommended today. I'll first be presenting a background on the application to inform Council of the application. I'll then present the referral evaluation criteria to help Council understand what it is they are required to provide the liquor branch. And then I'll discuss the public notice requirements and the timeline. And I'll conclude with staff recommendations. Bone Cider House is located at 1125 Grafton Road and is situated mid-island within the Valley and Adams Roads neighborhoods. The property has a local municipal zoning of Rural Commercial 1 and a provincial zoning of Agricultural Land Reserve, so ALR. An important reminder here is that although cidery use is not a permitted use within the municipality's land use bylaw, because the cidery is on ALR, a cidery is a permitted farm use, and hence they are permitted to operate as a cidery. Now, given they are permitted to have a cidery, they naturally needed to apply for a manufacturing liquor license with the liquor branch, which they have received. And as part of the manufacturing license, they are entitled to apply for a lounge endorsement application to permit both an indoor and outdoor lounge in their cidery. However, this lounge endorsement is subject to local government feedback. For context, the cidery submitted their initial application at the end of March 2022. And given the nature of these applications, several revisions and updates were required, and the municipality received a completed application from the applicant on September 19th, 2022. In terms of the local government feedback requirement, as the municipality does not explicitly regulate hours, the size, and operation of the lounge area, we are engaging in the public notice of the cannabis licensing referral policy in consulting the neighbors within 300 meters of the cidery, which will be further discussed in the upcoming slides. As the municipality does not have their own unique definition of a lounge in the land use bylaw, we're using the liquor branch's definition along with the ALR's lounge regulation, which states a lounge is an indoor lounge, an outdoor patio, or both on the site of a manufacturing facility where a manufacturer, so the cidery, may sell or serve, or I should say, and serve liquor by the glass. And in relation to the ALR use regulations, the cidery is permitted to operate a food and beverage service lounge if the area of the lounge does not exceed 125 square meters, both indoors and outdoors for the lounge. Next, this is a reference slide that presents the floor plan of the cidery's lounge locations within the first floor of the building. Given the floor area of the lounge is compliant with the ALR indoor and outdoor lounge regulations, staff do not believe there should be any issues with the size of this lounge. Now, as part of the application, the applicant is requesting an occupancy load of 98 individuals within the indoor lounge and an occupancy load of 167 individuals for the outdoor lounge. Now, I'll stress that these numbers were calculated by a building professional and are supported by the municipality's fire department. The conditional hours of operation placed on the cidery by last council is 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. from Sunday to Thursday, and 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. from Friday to Saturday. And then finally, to address any possible septic or water-related concerns pertaining to the application, staff have consulted with the septic professional on file during the change of occupancy to assembly use and connected again with Vancouver Coastal Health, so VCH, their environmental health officer, about the septic system. At this time, we are still waiting for direction from VCH. However, we can assure that the community that if any septic-related concerns are discovered by VCH, the applicant will have to address this, and that the septic-related messaging will also be explicitly brought forward to the liquor branch. So next I'll review the liquor branch's referral criteria, and hence this is what council should be thinking about for the consideration date, which is January 23rd, and we'll be making that in the recommendation. So in terms of what the liquor branch expects from the government or local government, the municipalities should gather public input from the community within the immediate vicinity of the cidery. The municipality should consider the location of the cidery, the person capacity, and the hours of liquor service. And then finally, the municipality should consider the impact of noise and view on nearby residents and the community at large. To clarify any confusion around what the applicant's public notice is, I've listed out on the slide how the public will be notified regarding the additional public feedback. So first, staff will mail out the notice that council is considering the application again on January 23rd, 2023 to the neighbors within the 300 meters of the property. And given previous council direction, we will also mail out information pertaining to the good neighbor agreement with the cidery, in addition to the public meeting date. Second, the municipality will publish notice that the application is being considered by council in 2 consecutive publications in the undercurrent, which will be issued on January 12th and January 19th, 2023. And then finally, the municipality will issue public notice via the municipal website. I would also like to confirm that the public can share their thoughts about the application in person at Municipal Hall, so 981 Artisan Lane, or by mail, by fax, or by email to mayor and council at bimbc.ca. Members of the public can also make comments or public comments at the January 23rd council meeting. And I encourage members of the public to come to the public meeting for the good neighbor agreement. Given we're planning for a large occupancy, we need to engage in a rental space, and consequently, we're still actively confirming a location and date. Now, before I present the recommendations, I want to clearly paint out the timeline for council and the public. As the slide demonstrates, today, December 12th, we are introducing to council the application and seeking council direction to notify the members of the public of the new public notice period and notifying them of the January 23rd consideration date. Although members of the public have been providing the constant input, which is totally fine, given we need to follow some sort of formal timeline with the cannabis referral licensing policy, the public notice period will essentially start during the week of December 19th, so next week, when staff mail out the notices, and it will end on January 23rd, when council considers all of the public input of the application and the good neighbor agreement. So hence staff are recommending the 3 following recommendations. First, that notice be given that council will be considering the lounge endorsement application for Bowen Cider House at the January 23rd, 2023 meeting of council. Second, that council authorize staff to give public notice for the consideration of approval of the lounge endorsement application for Bone Cider House to all properties within 300 meters of the legal boundary of 1125 Grafton Road. And then third, in response to the community feedback about not receiving RCMP input, we are recommending that council refer the lounge endorsement application for comment to RCMP. And I can now take questions.
Any questions from councillors? Councillor Pratt? Councillor Jurgensen?
Thank you for the report. I have, gosh, what are I doing taking this on? I have one question about parking. I know the previous council asked that the parking be on site. And I'm wondering with the sizes, do we have any idea of the impact that may have on nearby wells? Because cars leak fluids and things like that. I don't know whether anybody else has that concern, but I know that one of the long-term impacts of parking areas can be if they're on gravel and there's runoff, can be on nearby groundwater. And so maybe, I'm just wondering if there's been any thought about that.
To the planner, any?
Sure.
Response?
Council to the chair, or through the chair, that's something that we can look into in terms of the proximity to their wells. I wouldn't be able to communicate that at this time, but it's something we can definitely look into.
Thank you. It's just that not only the cideries wells, which I imagine they're thinking about, but neighboring wells
Sure.
that may or may not be registered with the provincial database. So it might be a bigger question. I guess I don't need the details. I just want to know what kind of impact would that kind of parking lot potentially have, so the council knows whether to ask staff to do more work about it. So I'm just going to leave that with staff.
Okay.
Councillor Jurgensen?
Through the chair, has the applicant indicated what their ideal combined occupancy would be? I understand the liquor licensing has to be done kind of all outside and all inside, and you put the two numbers together and you get your total, but have they indicated what a number would be ideally for them of a combined total that could be put into the good neighbor agreement?
I think it was on one of the slides. You might not have been able to read it. You might need to read it out.
Through the chair to council, do you mean combined as in the total for the?
Yes, in indoor and outdoor, but have they indicated a different number of what they would ideally like to see? Because, okay, on a good day where everybody's sitting outside, they may want to have the full 167 outside.
Yeah.
On a cold day, they want to have the full 98 inside, but combined between the two spaces, do they have an ideal number of how many people they would like to be able to accommodate within the space?
Their combined number would be the total of the indoor and outdoor. They have not voiced what an ideal occupancy load. They're requesting the maximum occupancy load, which is 98 for the inside and 167 for the outside. So they wouldn't be permitted to go over that maximum.
No,
requirement.
I understand that for the purposes of the liquor license, but have they indicated for the purposes of the good neighbor agreement what a good combined total of those two would be? Or are they still seeking the full occupancy load for the inside and outside as their total allowed on the whole property at one time?
That I wouldn't be able to speak to because that's part of the building. So for this application, we were just looking at the lounge area. I think what you're getting at is the events for the good neighbor agreements. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay, right. So that's something that will have to be discussed further with the applicant. But again, any form of event, if they're planning on using the indoor lounge area or the outdoor lounge area, would have to adhere to the occupancy load requirement.
Understood. Thank you.
Any other questions from council? Councilor Saunders?
Chair, I noticed your comment about septic and water capacity, been consulted and staff are waiting for further direction. Can you elaborate just a little bit on that for us? I mean, is there something that pending that could affect any decision here?
So it was brought to our attention from a member of the public that for septic capacity, there's a definition of a lounge and there's a definition of assembly. So for Vancouver Coastal Health, they're the ones who ultimately make the decision about whether or not this particular lounge application would fall under the assembly definition or the lounge definition. So we're just waiting to hear back as to whether or not this particular application with the occupancy would fall within the lounge definition as opposed to what it is now under, which is the assembly definition.
Is it safe to say the applicant is involved in those discussions with you with Vancouver Coastal?
The applicant is aware of this, whether or not they have consulted on their own with Vancouver Coastal. I wouldn't be able to speak to that, but from the municipality's perspective, we are consulting with Vancouver Coastal to ensure that the septic capacity is adequate.
Thank you.
Pardon my ignorance on this. Is the lounge building itself, a proposed structure or a currently existing structure?
Well, the structure is built currently, but the actual area is essentially a proposed lounge.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Getty?
So since the October 24th meeting, we've had our process in terms of sending it back for public hearing. And there's been a meeting between the applicants and the neighbors. The good neighbor agreement, there's a draft, there was a meeting after the community meeting where staff was going to start working with the applicant on that. Is that going to be progressing at the same time as our new process before the open house or the open meeting and public meeting, sorry. And I know there's not a lot of time at a council meeting, so there's public speaking at the beginning, but it's like 2 or 3 minutes. I'm assuming that everybody's going to work on the good neighbor agreement as much as possible between now and then. That would be a fair assumption from what you've been doing with working with the people?
Sorry, through the chair to council, can you confirm when you were saying that staff is working? You mentioned that there was a meeting with the applicant and the community.
Was there not a meeting between staff and the applicant to start the draft of the good neighbor agreement?
There was an initial meeting to go over the good neighbor agreement, yes. And then you had a comment about the applicant and the community having a meeting and then staff drafting something. But that staff have not drafted anything after the applicant having a meeting with the community.
Okay. So on page 74 of our agenda, if I may, through the chair?
Yep.
Thank you. Staff have created a preliminary working draft for the Good Neighbor Agreement, attachment 4, which is foundationally derived from the Legion. And I am hoping, and if you can confirm, that the parties are going to be trying to work on the Good Neighbor Agreement while this public meeting process is in play. Is that your understanding?
Yes. So for the public notice, we are also confirming the Good Neighbor Agreement public meeting date, and also encouraging members of the public to come in and talk to us about the Good Neighbor Agreement prior to the public meeting.
Right. Thank you.
Just noting the time, For the planner, would you be able to put the recommendation back up on screen, please? So we do have a recommendation on the screen. Is there, Councilor Pratt?
I just note that the recommendation up here is slightly different from the one in our, I thought it was, maybe it isn't. Oh, no, sorry, I guess it is the same. Okay. I'll move it, the first one.
I have the corporate officer read out the recommendation one more time, please.
Yeah, so that notice be given that council will be considering a liquor license referral bracket lounge endorsement area for Bowen Cider House at 1125 Grafton Road, legally lot 1 of Lot D, District Lot 1349, Plan 21511 at the January 23rd, 2023 meeting of council.
So I move that.
I'll second that.
Second by Councilor Morse. Any discussion? All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Motion carries unanimous.
Can I move the second one?
I think that was the whole,
No.
the next one is,
That council authorized staff to give public notice for the consideration of approval of liquor license referral bracket lounge endorsement area application for Bowen Cider House in accordance with the Liquor Control and Licensing Act for all properties within 300 meters of the legal boundary of 1125 Grafton Road, legally described as Lot 1, Block D, District Lot 492, Plan 2250, PID 009375627. And did you want the?
And just add this last one too.
Okay, that council referred the liquor license referral lounge endorsement area for Bowen Cider House at 1125 Grafton Road to the RCMP.
Could we say for comment at the end of that? Whatever.
Or a comment.
Yeah.
comment.
Thank you. Then I'll move that.
Moved by Councilor Fast.
Second.
Councilor Morse. Any discussion? All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, motion carries unanimous. Item 6.2 on our agenda, temporary appointments to the Community Center Select Steering Committee. The recommendation is that council appoints Mary Andrew Leonard, Councilor Judith Getty, and Councilor Allison Morris to the Community Center Select Steering Committee for a term ending January 31st, 2023. Councilor Jurgensen?
I move.
So moved by Councilor Jurgensen, second by Councilor Saunders. Any discussion? Councilor Fast?
This is a period of just 1 month. Is that right? I forget why we were doing this.
Because we're appointing all of our committees for the term on January.
Okay, thank you.
For the discussion, seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, motion carries unanimously. Section 7 bylaw 7.1 loan authorization bylaw number 595 2022, the Bluewater Park improvements. Recommendation from the committee of the whole with the LAC chairs meeting held on December 7th, 2022. I believe there's no presentation on this. Would you be able to read the recommendation, please?
The recommendation is that Bowen Island Municipality Loan Authorization Bylaw number 595 2022, which authorizes the borrowing of up to $3.1 million in capital funds to enable sourcing and supplying of additional water for Bluewater Park to be read a first, second, and third time.
Any discussion on this recommendation? Councilor Morris.
Yes, the bylaws was in my package, it seems to have disappeared.
Page 129.
Oh, okay, because it's not here on the agenda. It's not listed as an attachment.
Hyperlinked. It is one page. Is it possible to put it on screen?
The hyperlink isn't on the agenda sheet. I thought it had disappeared. I guess my concern is the first whereas. Is it broad enough to match? I'm quite happy with the wording of the resolution, but if the first whereas says that it's deemed desirable and expedient to undertake well upgrades and water main replacement, for the benefit of the Bluewater Park local service area.
Mhm.
So the wording is broader in the resolution than it is in the bylaw. And so the bylaw would take precedent. So we can only use the 3.1 million for well and water main upgrades. And I guess my concern is what happens if it turns out when they pull the pump in the Golden Bay well, that they discover that it's not the pump that's the problem, it's the aquifer that's the problem. And therefore there would be some other work that needed to be done instead. So is there some other words that I did send an email to the CFO about that could be put in there so that, you know, the whole thing would go on hold if they can't interconnect with Golden Bay, if those wells turn out not to be as good as everybody's thinking they might be. And because of what I've heard about the other wells in the area, I'm concerned. So is there some wording that we could put in to undertake well upgrades, water main replacement, and other activities to source water for Bluewater? To add words like that in there, just so that I know you need some specificity for the inspector of municipalities. So, but is there a few more general words that could go in, just in case we have to do something else?
There was, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, in the original recommendation that was drafted for the committee of the whole meeting with the LAC chairs, that language of well upgrades and water main replacement was actually in the recommendation. We did switch it to enable sourcing and supplying of additional water.
Yeah.
Is that something that you would want to see?
Well, my understanding from talking with the CFO, and I stand to be corrected, it's not that the inspector of municipalities who signs off on this wants a little more specific. Specific in the bylaw. So I guess for well and water main upgrades, and sourcing and supplying of the water to Bluewater, if we put those words in, would the inspector be okay? And it gives us just a little bit more leeway if it turns out those Golden Bay wells aren't good.
Maybe I'll work that, but CFO.
I did draft a potential amendment to the first whereas in the bylaw. I could read that for you now. Let me consider that. So whereas it is deemed desirable and expedient to undertake well upgrades, construct water main replacements, and undertake exploration of new wells for the benefit of the Bluewater Park local service area. And whereas, and it would continue.
Would that same language modification need to be added in the second whereas as well? Because it also speaks to well upgrades and water main distribution for the actual.
Oh, yes, thank you.
And we would need to put that same wording into our resolution.
Okay. Councillor Getty?
Through the chair. There was discussion in terms of whether or not the exploration of other wells had been deposited. And my understanding is that it had not been, and it hadn't been included in this cost estimate. And part of our problem was that, and the questions around that, in terms of what had been done and whether or not there were potential slots and things, were hampered because poor Patrick was on his long, whatever, deserved holiday. So I think if we start fiddling with this at this point, and adding little bits and pieces, it's vague enough that if we have a problem with one bay, then we're probably not going to be borrowing up to 3.1, right? Or anything. We might have to reconsider that whole first phase. But I think that if we start fiddling with adding those few extra words that the CFO is suggesting, then we're changing the dynamic and we're changing what we've agreed to at that committee of the whole meeting. And I'm worried about messing with it because we've come this far.
That's best.
Thank you. I have before us what I believe to be the recommendation of staff, including Patrick, and, sorry, I should say, the manager of Public Works and the LIC chairs from our meeting last week. And I too am concerned about making changes. What I suggest is, and I think we would hear, if there's a problem, the CFO will surely come back to us and say, look, we need to amend the bylaw. And then let's do that then. Right now, this is what everybody agreed to. And I think opening up to and exploration is a big opening. And I want to stay in good faith with the process that has been followed so far and the agreements among the LAC chairs. And so I would like to move the motion as it's presented here, if I may. That Bowen Island Municipality Loan Authorization Bylaw number 595, 2022, which authorizes the borrowing of up to 3.1 million in capital funds to enable sourcing and supplying of additional water for Bluewater Park be read a first, second, and third time.
You're a seconder? Second, Councillor Gidley. Any discussion on the motion? Councillor Jurgensen.
The very question that was brought up by our public speakers during public comments, just being more vague than necessary. Is there anything that can be done to tighten that back up? Some, or that should be done to tighten that back up? Some.
Mr. Edwards.
Through the chair, Councillor Ferguson, the resolution doesn't quite state the intended works as clearly and explicitly as the proposed bylaw does. The bylaw is what really matters here, and that's what the inspector and municipalities will be considering for approval. And the bylaw is more specific. And so I think if we stick with the bylaw, we're okay.
Thank you.
I have a couple of points of information. Can I maybe invite our Director of Engineering up?
You didn't take the bleach bottle first.
Sorry, I missed all the time. That's no problem. Enjoy yourself. I think one of the points of information that we have really centers around some of the concerns that were brought up by the LAC chairs around the potential need that was identified in the reports and possibly with the risk of a Bowen Bay well failing would be sort of the time horizon of needing to drill new wells in the area. Does that sound accurate from what we heard from the folks there? So I guess my question is, based on your knowledge of the water systems and the reliance on that single Bowen Bay well, and Councillor Morris might have some pieces to add here as well. What would the timeline be? If I recall correctly, it was like between 1 and 3 or 2 and 5 new wells would need to be drilled at some point. But what would the timeline for that be?
So just first to clarify, it's not a reliance on a single Bowen Bay well. It's
okay.
Actually a reliance on 8 wells within 3 water systems, 3 in Bowen Bay, 3 in King Edward Bay, and 2 in Bluewater. So there's a lot more resiliency than having one system relying on one well. You've got, something goes wrong with one well, you've got 7 others that are supplying water to everybody. In terms of when new wells would be needed, it could be a 5-year time horizon. It could be a 10-year time horizon. It really depends on what level of additional development might occur in these areas. We do know that the Arbutus Ridge development is going to be built out within that time frame. We've identified one new well that has promising capacity adjacent to the Arbutus Ridge development that we were actively working with the developer on connecting that into the system and bringing that online within that time frame. I would recommend, and I was intending to recommend that in the budgeting for 2023 that we include some budget for exploration of at least the desktop portion to identify more specifically where you would be targeting test wells to develop new capacity. And so that we would within that, within the following year, or in the next couple of years, have an ability to move forward with the field investigation portion of identifying, actually drilling a well, monitoring the water levels in the well, and pump tests, and that sort of thing.
Okay, so there was some appetite then to in parallel do some exploration of water sources.
Well, yes, and I'd always tried to get that message across in the meetings with the LACs is that it's not a question of are we going to upgrade the existing wells or develop new sources. It's we need to do both of those things. We're confident that upgrading the existing wells will meet current needs of all users. We expect that, and getting back to your question, the time frame is uncertain. So the most prudent thing to do would be to move forward in parallel, essentially right away with the process of exploring for new sources.
Okay.
And one of which we've identified and would require the well I was talking about adjacent to Arbutus Ridge would still require some test pumping to make sure it's not pulling water from the same water bearing fractures as the Arbutus Ridge well. And so that's already further along the process of bringing a new source online, and then additional sources beyond that. We're really at the beginning stages. All we have at this point is the hydrogeologist report identified some potential areas on a map very broadly where you might want to or where it would be likely make most sense to explore for new sources. But we haven't progressed beyond that.
And then perhaps to the CAO or CFO, my sense was in the committee of the whole meeting, there was one of the reasons why $3.17 million figure was contemplated or recommended was that it gave us room. It seemed like everything in phase one was absolutely necessary, but the idea being that there would be perhaps some flexibility for phase two, or even if it was needed or if it was discovered that it was needed, that some of that money could be used for drilling a new well or exploring new water sources. Does the language of this bylaw preclude that from happening, or is it pretty strictly that it would be on phase one and phase two?
I think it all comes down to interpretation. And so when we look at the resolution has that flexibility in it, the bylaw is a little more prescribed. Yeah. And so, one could infer that where it says well upgrades, that, how broad can that go? Right? The inspector of municipalities would, having been the deputy, would read that and say, okay, that's fine as it stands. And, if we were to then turn around and say, okay, well, we actually need to shift and explore new wells and drill new wells. I don't think the province would really take issue with that, but I think we want to be explicitly clear with the community
Yeah.
And the public to be very clear that the 3.1 is for X, Y, and Z.
Okay.
So I agree that phase one is critical, and so all elements of phase one being critical. And an approach that may be considered is to make that explicit that it's for phase one, and that elements of phase two could be adjusted pending the outcome of investigations of the Bowen Bay wells.
Okay. And my impression is that as that gets prepared for going out to the community for assent, we would have that pretty clearly detailed and laid out, and where the money is actually going to be directed to. Is that correct?
Yeah, if council were to decide 3.1 is the number that we want to stick with, we would be recommending that the 1.7 remain as phase one, and that we can then be more specific about the remainder 1.4. As it currently is contemplated, the 1.4 is for the upgrades to the remaining primary water mains in Bluewater Park.
Okay. Councilor Morris.
So the suggested wording that the CFO had would pick up, having spent a lot of time dealing with words. It's for well and water main upgrades. So I would read that to mean existing wells. So the suggested wording the CFO had was for well. I can read it. Yeah.
So hang on, are you proposing an amendment?
Well, I'm proposing that
Because we heard,
sorry, yeah, because I'm differing on agreeing on how the inspector might interpret the words. I guess my worst case scenario is you said 2 Bluewater wells, 3 King Edward Bay wells, and how many Bowen Bay wells? 3. And if the one where we don't know what's wrong turns out to be a dud, or only producing what it's producing now, if it's even producing, then do we have enough wells?
We're confident we have enough supply from all of these wells. That the well you're referring to, the Bowen Bay well 1 is a pump issue. We've done extensive monitoring and have in those wells. We reviewed those findings more recently with the same engineers and hydrogeologists to essentially get them to reconfirm their recommendations about the capacity of these wells. So we don't, I don't have any doubt that it's a well problem on that.
Okay, I just really would like to be safe and throw in well exploration.
Councilor Saunders.
And through the chair to Mr. Edwards, is there any danger in the wording of this as it is? So without the potential changes suggested here, so just the resolution as we're looking at it right now, is there any danger there that we would not be able to then take some of that funding if that was the decision and do well upgrades and explore for new wells with some of that funding? But it strikes me that the intent from the committee of the whole was to perhaps some of that money might be available for that if necessary, as opposed to all for water main upgrades. Are we digging ourselves or putting ourselves in a corner that we can't get out of in any way with this wording?
Without a doubt, you're always better to err on the side of caution, and adding that wording would be beneficial. It's clearer to the public, it's clearer to the inspector. Without that wording, and if council were to then choose to go and explore like new assets, new works, council could be challenged on that.
Councilor Jurgensen?
Would it be prudent to perhaps add some additional wording to Councilor Morris's amendment that would, if necessary, water exploration?
So what we're gonna have to do, the motion on the floor right now is to read the bylaw for a second time. So I think we pull that off by unanimous consent. Can you scroll down, Sophie?
First, second, third.
Just to the bylaw amendment. So we need to amend the bylaw before we read it. So the bylaw, whereas, and just on the screen here is the CFO's language edit. So whereas it is deemed desirable and expedient to undertake well upgrades, construct water main replacements, and undertake the exploration of new wells for the benefit of the Bluewater Park local service area. And then whereas the estimated total capital cost of the well upgrades, there would also need to be the language of undertaking exploration.
The top needs to match on the bottom.
I'm not sure it needs to be. For the second whereas. Because that cost of 3.1 doesn't include well exploration. It's water main distribution. Whereas the estimated capital cost of the well upgrades and the water main distribution replacement is 3.17. And my understanding of this is if we were to go to take some of that money and use it to explore new wells, that takes away from some of the water main distribution replacement. So I'm not sure it needs to go there.
The other issue was the 3.1 covers the second phase of the water mains. And if it turns out we need to drill wells, then we don't want to do the second phase of the water mains. So the second whereas needs some. Do we need the second whereas?
I don't believe so.
You don't need the second whereas because you're seeking the authorization for the 3.1.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so would that just get removed? What would what would it read as? I'm driving towards what this would actually read as.
Yeah, you could just delete that whereas because the bylaw itself is to authorize borrowing of up to 3.1.
Okay.
Do we need the reserve funds bit either?
No, you don't need it in the actual bylaw. It's more so for contextual information. So if it's in the report, then then you don't need it in the bylaw.
You know, what about that last whereas?
There are four, sorry, Leonard, there are four whereas total, or sorry, 5 if we remove the second whereas, or 5 total.
In the bylaw?
In the bylaw.
I need some more
Oh,
here.
sorry.
So it would take us down to 3. So this is what the whereases would look like in the bylaw if we were to amend the bylaw.
The draft bylaw.
The draft bylaw, obviously. That's Wake.
I think where we're getting muddled here is what we're trying to do is pretty straightforward. We're trying to authorize enough money that we can do stuff as fast as we really want to do it.
Yeah.
And we don't know how fast that is. So we're being asked to, lay the plan for exactly what we're going to do before we borrow the money. Well, we don't know what we're going to do. So, so that's why I thought this thing should be left with some flexibility. And I, defer to the CAO in terms of what we have to do that.
Through the chair and with all due respect, Councillor Wake, I do think we do know what we need to do. I think what is also happening here is we're trying to build in flexibility. So we have a very clear understanding of the absolute need for phase 1. But I think what we're contemplating, and it's good to contemplate this, is if through the work of phase 1 or additional work that we're conducting right now, we determined that there's problems with the existing 8 wells, then can we pivot with the amount of money that we're proposing here? That's challenging to do in this world where we're borrowing money and we're seeking the electorate approval for that because they want clarity and certainty about the use of those monies.
I guess what I'm thinking is that, yes, we know what we want to do. We have the big plan. I think what we're not sure of is if this happens, then maybe we'll do that first and more of that later. You know, there's going to be a timing thing, and we can't. Well, I think it's going to be challenging to borrow the 4 or the 6 million. So this was seen as a way to leave us a bit of flexibility, do all of one, and see what happens as we do that, and then decide. And presumably it would be, in concert with the LAC, what the next steps are going to be. Now, I don't see how we can sort of spell all that out until we start doing some of the work. And some of the answers.
And I believe that is going to be spelled out, particularly as we drive towards the assent process. So I might offer to rein us in here a little bit. We're running about 20 minutes behind. So just looking around the table, the edits to the whereases, from the chair's mind at least, seem to harmonize the recommendation that came back from that committee of the whole a little better with the actual bylaw itself, without changing the bylaw too much. If there's appetite to amend the bylaw, what I would suggest is that just by unanimous consent, we withdraw the motion to read the first, second, and third times.
It hasn't been moved and seconded.
It has been moved and seconded.
It wasn't, was it?
Yeah, it was.
Yes. Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
moved it.
Oh, I didn't realize.
So if there's no objection, let's withdraw the motion to read the first, second, and third time to make the amendments to the bylaw. And that carries unanimously. So now we are in the position of being able to amend the whereases of the bylaw itself, which I'll have the corporate officer scroll down with the edits here. So this would replace the whereases in bylaw number 595 as attached in the agenda package with these items here. So striking the second one and changing the first one to whereas it is deemed desirable and expedient to undertake well upgrades, construct water main replacements, and undertake exploration of new wells for the benefit of the Bluewater Park local service area. Is there any member who wishes to move that amendment? Moved by Councillor Wake, seconded by Councillor Morse. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, amendment carries unanimously. And so with the bylaw amended, now we can move to moving it to a second and third time.
So
Councillor Fast.
I move that the Bowen Island Municipality Loan Authorization Bylaw 595/2022, which authorizes the borrowing up to 3.1 million in capital funds to enable sourcing and supplying of additional water for Bluewater Park, be read a first, second, and third time.
As amended?
It's already been amended. We just moved the amendment.
Okay.
Secondly, Councillor Getty. Any discussion on the main motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried unanimously. Moving on to section 8 of the agenda, reports of committees, committee poll and commissions. We dealt with that in the consent agenda. Section 9, staff reports. Oh, thank you, Mr. Graham.
Can I take 5 minutes?
Yes, recess for 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Right, we are in recess. Siri, the timer for 5 minutes.
Walk the other way either.
No, it's not. It's not really, that's like, that's the chair.
Oh.
Oh, but you're not.
Right up to the board.
But I was gonna say.
Why it's so
You want more water? Ah. There is more than one.
Back support.
So,
It's amazing what a little back support.
Oh, yeah. Just so everybody knows, I've opened a couple windows because we're in the about 1,000 parts per million. Carbon dioxide.
You want a window?
I opened the two back here and I'll keep this door open. Hopefully that'll. If it stays up, I'll let you know. You can open it behind you.
Well, it feels warm over here, Todd. You feel warm?
It's 75.8
I'm
degrees
warm enough.
Fahrenheit.
See what happens. Got my blanket.
Mhm.
so
You recorded? If you don't mind opening the tiny crack, I think it would be a good idea because it's still going up.
Only with that, one more.
Oh,
permit 2022-0328, which is to request a variance at 1308 Hillcrest Road. This property is located on a dead-end road in the Scarborough area of Bowen Island. Excellent. And the property is zoned SR2 settlement residential. Excellent. So the application is to request that the minimum required provision of off-street parking stalls for a dwelling and a bed and breakfast operation, so being 2 spaces total, are reduced to 0 spaces in order to allow the bed and breakfast operation to go ahead. Next slide. So the first site photo here is looking north towards the dead end of the streets, with the street parking currently used by the subject property shown on the left side of the road. Next slide. And this site photo here is looking west and facing the property head on, where you can again see the street parking used by the property, as well as having a view of the steepness of the property. Next slide. So at this stage in the development variance permit process, the application has been reviewed after its submission in October. Initial notices were issued to neighbors to inform them that at the December 12th, 2022 regular council meeting, council would decide whether to direct staff to issue further public notices in advance of a hearing for the variance to be held on the estimated date of January 23rd, 2023. Next slide. In advance of the municipality issuing neighborhood notices, the applicant had provided a letter of support signed by 6 neighboring landowners. Also following the issuance of neighborhood notices, a letter of opposition was received from an outsider, from an owner outside of the notification radius. Next slide. So this is visually showing where those letters have come from, or the signatures. So the signatures and support you can see clustered around the subject property, and then letter of opposition to the southeast from Miller Road. Next slide. So since implementing business license requirements for short-term rentals, staff have often had discussions with property owners who lack sufficient parking to be licensed for a short-term rental. This development variance permit is the first submitted application to address this issue. Staff are seeking to issue public notice and also to gain policy input from council regarding this type of application. Next slide. So regarding alternatives, council could choose to consider this at January 9th meeting. However, as the notices would have to go out over the holiday period, staff do recommend that consideration occur at the January 23rd meeting. Second alternative is that council may refer the application back to staff for further information, or number 3, any other options as determined by council. Next slide. Our recommendation is that notice be given that council will be considering the issuance of development variance permit 2022-0328 for the variance of minimum off-street parking requirements at 1308 Hillcrest Road at the January 23rd, 2023 meeting of council, and the council authorized staff to give notice for the consideration of the issuance of DVP 2022-0328 in accordance with section 499 of the Local Government Act to all properties within 100-meter radius of 1308 Hillcrest Road.
Thank you. Any questions for the planner? Councilor Past?
Thank you, Planner Back. And I'm wondering if when you prepared this report, thank you for it, did you look at the transportation plan? Because this was adopted by council back in, I don't know, 2018, I think. And it includes a proposed pedestrian network that shows the little bridge or set of stairs or something that we put it to connect with. If you go back to this, one of the earlier slides that has the first photo, that one, whoop, that one, see the right of way continues as a trail past the, what you call the dead end.
Right.
It continues as a trail, which was constructed by the municipality back before I was on council. And so that would be before 2014. And at the end of it, it includes a little set of stairs, I think, or a little bridge to go up and connect with Cliff Road. That was before we had the transportation plan. But the transportation plan recognizes it in figure 16 as part of the proposed pedestrian network. And speaking from back with the Parks, Trails and Greenways Advisory Committee, the idea was that that was public road right of way beyond this little stretch of road, and would eventually become, and people were already cutting through it, except they couldn't find a way, so they were cutting through a neighboring property. So anyway, this made it so it wasn't a trespass issue. People were already using it to get around. And I just, I see the point about the steepness of the property, but I think we should be prioritizing pedestrian access and active transportation, as it says in our adopted transportation plan. And if you're looking for policy input, which is the words I heard, I would say I think we should go with our established and adopted transportation plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Saunders and Councillor Jurgensen.
Just through the chair, just a quick question. Is the intent, as you're planning of the variance ask, that the parking would be where we're seeing it as opposed to on the road? Like there, it looked like there was room for another car or two beside those red ones. Is that the intent as you understand it?
Through the chair to Councillor Saunders, that's correct. Yeah, where you see both, basically those red vehicles to the left of the road, that's where they'll continue. That's where they intend to continue using.
My comment then would be that it doesn't appear to impede a lot of traffic, and the very nature of this is variance. It's not this isn't a normal set of circumstances. We're trying to direct policy on how many parking spots you need for B&B. That's not going to change. This is a variance for a reason. They can't build more parking there, it appears, from, and based on your report, that's my understanding of it. Thank you.
Councillor Jurgensen.
The charter planner back and has a alternative pedestrian only B&B being considered previously.
Through the chair to Councillor Jurgensen. No, this would be the first request to allow a bed and breakfast to operate with no parking at all. So yeah, that was largely the purpose of us introducing the business licensing policy for short-term rentals in the past. And so this is the first formal request to allow a bed and breakfast to legally operate without any parking.
Could, through the chair to planner back, and could the short-term rental bylaw be amended to create the concept of a pedestrian only B&B, like one where there is no cars? Therefore, it would be non-compliant.
Through the chair to Councillor Jurgensen, that's certainly a valid, that's a valid proposal that could be added to bylaw. I'd say so.
Thank you.
This is a note to the public. We do accept public comment at the start of the meetings during public comment, and then at the end of the meetings in the question answer period. Thank you. Councillor Giddy.
So through the chair to Mr. Trevor, the picture that we've got here in terms of the red cars that are on the side of the street and the other gray car, possibly something in the foreground, that's the existing parking for whoever's living in that building or other buildings along that street. Sorry.
Through the chair to Councillor Giddy, that's correct. That's what they're currently using.
So if there's a bed and breakfast and they arrive with a car, it's in addition to whatever the existing traffic is or the parking on the road.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. So in looking at that, and the next picture that had from the west looking at it is that there's I don't know what that is on a normal day or a normal weekend in terms of how full those spaces get, but is there space for, considering all of the residences along that street? They're small lots, and the number of vehicles that might be per family. Are there extra spaces? You know.
Through the chair to Councillor Giddy. So first off, I'll note that these photos were taken at like 10 a.m. on a Friday, I believe. So during a work day, so you're seeing a low level of traffic compared to what could be there. Yeah, you'd see much higher on the weekends, and it's certainly possible that's something that was brought up, I guess, but when I referred this to the Director of Public Works, he shared his opinion that he did believe that eventually we'd be seeing somebody else's street parking getting taken up, or even possibly an access blocked. Yeah, he was expecting.
And then just to bring us back for the sake of time, just noting that this is, the recommendation is for, is just one of notice, that notice is going to be given and the final approvals coming on January 23rd. Are there any other new questions that you have for the planner? Yes, Councillor Fast.
I would like to consider that because this is a travel route that people use when walking, which is partly why that work was done back before 2014, that the notice be extended beyond 100 meters, because I understand that people are walking from beyond 100 meters down through this area. So I would propose 300.
You're gonna muse?
Yeah.
So we haven't had the motion yet, so we could move the recommendation, and then if you wanted to move the recommendation with 300 meters, you'd be able to do that.
Well, I'm not gonna I think that's public right of way, and I am philosophically have trouble with privatizing public space. And the letter there did talk about children playing and narrow streets, and I see it in our transportation plan as the proposed pedestrian network, which I assume would mean what she calls it here, is a footpath or a trail, which these vehicles, if we grant the DVP, we would be offering them the opportunity to sit in the middle of future footpath, and then we couldn't build the footpath. So I think this, I won't be moving this motion because I'm philosophically attached to our adopted transportation plan and our climate action strategy and all those things.
This is to put the public on notice. It's not to move the development.
That's right. So this is just a recommendation to
I'd
give
like to
notice.
move that the notice be given that council will be considering the issuance of it. Do I read the first paragraph
You can read the
or
vote
the second one?
unless you wish to split them.
300.
Notice because the council will be considering the issuance of a development variance permit DVP 2022-0328 for the variance of a minimum off-street parking space requirements for 1308 Hillcrest Road, legally described as Lot 7, Block 5, Block A, District Block 1553, Plan 4042, PID 007-225-695 at the January 23rd, 2023 meeting of council. Keep going. Council authorized staff give notice for the consideration of issuance of development variance permit DVP 2022-0328 in accordance with section 499 Local Government Act to all properties within 300 meters of the legal boundary of 1308 Hillcrest Road, legally described as Lot 7, Block 5, Block A, District Block 1553, Plan 4042, PID 007-225-695.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Councilor Morse. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing that, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye. Aye. All opposed, raise your hand, say nay.
Nay.
Councilor Fast opposing. Motion carries.
Had one follow-up question. Can a DVP be for a limited period of time, or is it indefinite?
Through the chair, it would be.
Can you research that one and respond later?
Yeah, so the permit itself is issued and the work has to take place within 2 years. Once it's issued, then I believe it's sort of entitled and would run with. There could be conditions placed on it. So a condition could be placed that, for example, if a building permit for a new dwelling is granted, that parking have to be, or something like that, but absent a condition, it would run with the land.
Thank you. Thank you, Planner Backus. Moving on to item 9.2, temporary use permit 2022-0191, introduction for 1710 White Source Drive. Mr. Martin, our manager of planning and developments.
Thank you, Leonard. Leonard, as stated, my name is Daniel Martin. I'm the manager of development. And I have today for you a temporary use permit application to introduce, and I will start my screen. Okay, temporary use permit application at 1710 Whitesale Drive. So 1710 Whitesale Drive is on Whitesale, just where Whitesale turns into the Cape Broad Curtis subdivisions. This application is actually for the 2 lots, lot 1 and 56 shown highlighted here. And then lot 1 or 7-10 Whitesale immediately to the south. So 2 10-acre properties owned by a common property owner. And so they are the 2 properties. They're located in the rural residential 1 zone. And you can see on this map even how they're currently used. So the property to the north is the site of a construction of a single family house. The property to the south is vacant, but has an easement that runs over it. That's what's showing up on our mapping. So showing sort of a zigzag going down the property is the driveway to access the property at the northern property where the house is under construction. But so normally I go over what the zoning is for the site, but in this case, the zoning that's relevant is our general zoning prohibitions and exceptions in our land use bylaw. So the start of our land use bylaw has a section on uses that are prohibited in all zones. So in this case, the number 5 on that list is a use that's located partially or totally in a tent trailer, motorhome, camper, or other recreation vehicle without a permanent foundation, except when the tent trailer, motorhome, or camper is otherwise permitted by this bylaw. It's the crucial part of that prohibition, because then section 3.9 goes on to say, where a building permit has been issued for the construction of a building or structure for a permitted use, the owner or builder may use 1 travel trailer or camper on the lot for temporary accommodation during construction for a period not to exceed 1 year from the date of issuance of the building permit. So you can see this exception. It's been in our bylaw since 2002. You can kind of read in there what I gather to be the intent of the exception, which is that somebody's bought a property on Bowen and they want to live in a trailer while they build their house. So it's not okay, but the owner will live there for 1 year while they build the house. We've seen it in recent times. It's also used for, the builder of the site or the contractors for the site to do that. And we've run into issues, but sort of like the limits of it is that as you get a larger construction, the 1 year period becomes an issue. So we'll have to we'll enforce that and we'll tell people, okay, you had it for 1 year. They say, well, the house is half done. So, well, this is the permit exception, and the number of travel trailers as well has been an issue. This exception is also being used by the municipality during construction, during the fire hall construction. People may have noticed a trailer in the back that a worker was using during the construction period. And likewise, construction of our Cove Bay water treatment plant, again, you use this exception during construction. And then more recently, the municipality issued a temporary use permit to ourselves for, again, workers to be housed at the site of the Cove Bay water treatment plant while they were constructing the Tunstall Bay water reservoir. Just by way of context of the use of this exception. So the application before you today, the applicant has submitted an application for up to 6 travel trailers located across the 2 lots while the house construction is underway. So this is the site plan showing, and I'll go to a bigger picture on this side, but essentially the driveway that comes in off of Whitesale Drive comes in, and then at the top of the lot there, the plan shows 4 locations with temporary structures to house trailers. And then further south, a larger area that's identified as potential area for additional travel trailers. Just showing on this plan, just by way of context, at the top is sort of where some of the utilities for the site are also located. So the hydro transformer and the propane enclosure as well. This plan just shows the overall context of the site. So like I said, this house construction underway sort of at the western lower part of the lot. The driveway that comes in, the site office for the construction, the creek, Burke Creek coming down here with the setbacks from the creek showing. And then it's not very possible to make out on this plan, but the lot itself is quite steep. So this is a flatter area at the top. This area then comes down quite steeply, and this is the next flatter area. So Councillors Morris and Fascinating recall a variance permit that was done in the last council term for this house construction. And this then is that slightly larger view of the proposed site plan of those 4 temporary structures to house travel trailers, and then the potential for additional travel trailers. The report also notes some of the history of this site. So after the building permit was issued, we received notice that and the building inspector noted that there were multiple trailers on the site. And we informed the applicant of our bylaws and our requirements, and the applicant removed 3 of the trailers, so left 1 on site as permitted under our exception, removed the other 3 and the structure associated, and then has subsequently applied for the temporary use permit. And just by way of, this is the first temporary use permit this council term, so I wanted to include the official community plan, objective and policy under the temporary use permit. So objective 98, to give consideration to temporary land use permits for short-term or seasonal uses. And then policy 235, the municipality may consider issuing temporary land use permits, provided the use will not create an unacceptable negative impact upon the natural environment or the character of the neighborhood. Permits shall be issued in accordance with the Local Government Act. All areas within Bowen Island municipality boundaries are designated temporary use permit areas. So in reviewing this, the draft TUP, staff have outlined a number of conditions. So one, the applicant has requested the permit to run for a period of up to 3 years, which is the maximum permitted in the Local Government Act. So what staff have put in the permit is that it would run for the 3-year term or expire 1 month after the granting of any occupancy permit or interim occupancy permit on the land. So until construction is complete, essentially, that it would follow an attached management plan submitted by the applicant, so that contain conditions on things like noise and parking and servicing and those aspects of the people actually staying on the site, provide a contact information for a manager of the site to be available if there's issues. The staff also recommend that the temporary use permit be for a maximum of 4 travel trailers. So the applicant had requested 6, and that number was included in the initial notice we sent out. But staff recommend that a limit be imposed to 4, so the 4 sites that were identified with temporary structures, rather than the larger additional area. And then number 4, so the Local Government Act permits the local government to require the owner of land given undertaking to demolish or remove a building or other structure and restore the land. And then the Local Government Act then permits local government to require a security deposit to guarantee the performance of the permit. So staff recommend a $30,000 deposit and an undertaking that the owner enter into an undertaking that they will be removing the building and restoring the land at the end of the permit. And so similar slide to our planner 1. So just giving you where we are in the process. So we received the application, we conducted internal review, we sent out an initial notice. We were at the introduction, and what we are seeking is the public notice to come back for a final decision, again at the January 23rd meeting. So in advance of the municipality issuing the neighborhood notice, the applicant provided letters of support from the 2 immediate neighbors, so to the north and south of the project. We issued notice to owners of the property within 200 meters of the subject property. So so as in with the variance you saw tonight, after the council meeting of November 28th, what staff determined was that we would be sending that initial introduction notice to permit applications that we will be introducing it. So we haven't brought the bylaw for changes yet, but we wanted to proceed with that step. And looking at the map of this, we essentially felt that the 100 meters was not sufficient, and we doubled it to 200 to include some additional properties. As a result of that notice, we received 1 letter of support and 1 of opposition from residents, and 1 additional letter of support from an island resident outside the notice area. And just to map that, so this map is showing the subject properties in green. The blue properties are those within 100 meters of the site who received the notice, and then the purple color are within 200 meters. So it's essentially additional 5 properties received the notice, and then mapping just where we received those letters to date. And so similar to the DVP that you considered, it's possible to consider this and fulfill notice requirements by the January 9th meeting of council, but staff are again recommending that be extended to the 23rd, accounting for time when the municipal hall is closed. So the recommendation before you is that notice be given. The council will be considering the issuance of and that authorize staff to give notice to properties within 200 meters of the consideration of the January 23rd meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Councilor Jurgensen.
Through the chair, Mr. Martin. Mr. Martin, the letter of support received, was it within, and I would like to know the same for the letter of opposition. Were they received from within the blue area or within the purple area?
Thank you for the question, but yes, so of the 2 that were received, the letter of opposition was within the blue area, so within 100 meters, and the letter of opposition was within the 100-meter radius, and the letter of support was within the 200-meter radius.
Thank you.
So again, we're looking at a recommendation to issue notice. Do councilors have any questions for the planner on the recommendation of issuing notice? Councilor Fast.
Thank you for your, Manager Martin, thank you for your report. And I'm wondering, does this, would granting a temporary use permit like this be a precedent for the similar temporary use permit application that council saw before the election at Seymour Bay for the manufactured buildings site? Would this set some kind of precedent that would better us in any decisions around that temporary use permit?
Through the chair, I think in general, in terms of precedent, I would always say that council is only tied to past decisions to the extent that you feel the need to be consistent for similar applications. So people do, like we often do, look to past council decisions to try to guide applicants in terms of what council finds acceptable, but in no way does issuing one, in any way fetter your decision on another application. Council is, perfectly capable of saying, this application I supported for these reasons, right? And in this application, these are different, just because the sort of the high level number is the same, like they asked for 4 trailers and they asked for 4 trailers, it's the same application. No, council can say the sites are totally different, the neighbors are different, the neighborhood is different, the applications are different.
Thank you.
Question for Mr. Martin through the chair. If the area for notice was expanded, leaning towards the 300 meters, that would take in a lot of the little lots. I take it that's Windjammer? That's just to the
White sales.
White sales, okay. So, sorry. And those, it seems to me that those are the people that are having the most concerns about the traffic and the speed and the kids on the street and all the rest of it. So I would think that they would have some comment, and they might, on the one hand, be in favor of cutting back on traffic for this build, and otherwise they might have something to say in terms of whether or not this is a viable solution for that kind of problem. So would it be difficult for staff to expand the notice? All those little lots?
To the chair, it wouldn't be difficult. It's just a matter of generating a larger list. Like I know in this one, like we haven't made the bylaw changes yet for the notice, and this is the first time we've sent out notice in advance of coming to council. And I did wrestle a bit with the decision of, I sort of looked at it and thought 100 is too small, and then it's like, well, how far do I extend it before coming to council at all? But I will note, just even as I quickly sort of do the measurements, I think even 300 would not capture. It may capture the first few. Yeah. So there's a scale at the bottom of the map, so you can see 300 meters is, it'll sort of capture the next round of properties, but it wouldn't capture the extent of white sale.
Well, through the chair, if we wanted to try and get more input, then it seems to me that we need to get some of those people with the smaller lots and the more congested areas involved.
The chair, isn't it? Like the public notification isn't just mailings to people within 100, 300, or 500 meters, though. There's plenty of other ways that people can and would become aware of this through, through the course of their day-to-day life.
Through the chair, so that the notice would consist of, we mail notice to neighbors. The applicant we will produce a sign for the applicant to place on site. We will place it in the undercurrent and on our municipal newsletter.
Thank you.
It looks like motion, or unless we have more questions.
Well, I'll do one question and then I'll read the motion. How big is the notice going to be on site? A 4x8 sheet?
I think our standard is the 2x2 that you've probably seen. I might look at this one and just making a larger one. There would be apparent anyone passing by. I'm not, but I would have to check too, Councillor Morse, with our general sign bylaws in terms of what would be the maximum sign permitted, but yeah, so our standard is a 2x2, and I could look at increasing it, but probably not as large as it wouldn't be a 4x8 sign.
That's the only way that you can sort of read it. When you're talking about it. Okay, I won't put that in the motion. But I move that notice be given that council will be considering the issuance of temporary use permit TUP 2022-0191 for temporary worker accommodation used for 1710 White Cells Drive, legally described as Lot 1, District Lot 1548, Group 1, New Westminster District Plan, BCP 43265, PID 028131, and Lot 156, Block B, District Lot 492, Plan 19050, PID 00603047, January 23rd, 22 meeting of council. And that council authorized staff to give notice for the consideration of issuance of temporary use permit CUP 2022-0191 in accordance with section 494 of the Local Government Act to all properties within 200 meters of the legal boundary of 1710 White Cells Drive, legally described as Lot 1, District Lot 1548, Group 1, New Westminster District Plan, PCP 43265, PID 0281324041, and Lot 156, Block B, District Lot 492, Plan 19050, PID 00603047.
Moved, seconded by Councillor Saunders. Any discussion? Councillor Past?
Yeah, I took a look in the, I won't be voting in favor of this one either. It's not that I'm against proposals, it's that I'm concerned about proposals that run contrary to our official community plan. And official community plan policy 189 is the one that's behind the land use bylaw portions that Planner Martin read to us. And it says, among other things, trailer parks shall not be permitted within the municipality. And not sure that this is a definition of a trailer park, but for me, it's a group of trailers that are serviced together and that have temporary people living in them that are not part of the neighborhood. So that's a big concern for me. And of course, I want to uphold our local bylaws, our land use bylaw. And I don't know about a temporary use permit that goes against one of the core things of the official community plan over time. Anyway, there's lots of people who've had people with smaller properties who built the houses themselves, who've coped with the 1 year aspect. And I'm also concerned about the social equity side of it. Some of them haven't been able to do it and they've had to bear the costs of it. Whereas this proposal seems to be not prioritizing local employment, but instead asking for this TUP in order to bring in temporary employees. So I'm from outside of the community is my point. Anyway, so with those things, I would prefer to prioritize local workers, and I would be voting in favor. And besides, I think it should be 500 meters.
Through the chair, I just would like to comment that I don't see that as a trailer park personally, from my point of view. The very nature of the things that we're discussing tonight, temporary use permit and variance for the previous one, these indicate this is not intended in any way to be permanent or to overturn something that's a long-standing tenet of the community, such as was pointed out by Councilor Pass and the OCP. I just don't see quite the concern there for my part, recognizing that other people have different opinions on that. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Councilor Fast, I would move an amendment to change 200 meters to 500 meters.
Seconded.
Seconded by Councilor Fast. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor of the amendment to change 200 to 500 meters? Raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, raise your hand, say nay. Counselor Saunders opposing, and then it carries. So we're back to the main motion. Any other discussion on the main motion? Counselor Jurgensen?
To the chair, this, just to confirm, this is just to notice.
It's just the issue notice, yeah, of the temporary use permit, and then it will return to us on January 23rd for approval. Seeing no further discussion, I will call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, raise your hand, say nay.
Nay.
Councillor Fast opposing, motion carries. Moving on to new business 11.1, recommendation that I put on the agenda after our ferry cancellations last week in hopes of garnering council support. Itself to go out and reach out to other local elected officials. The recommendation reads, whereas transportation security to the new land is being voiced as an increasing and ongoing concern to Bowen Island residents. Be it resolved that council declare support for Mayor Leonard to seek out and engage elected officials from neighboring jurisdictions to find common ground on transportation advocacy to provincial and regional governments. Be it further resolved that Mayor Leonard report back to council on these efforts at regular council meeting no later than January 23rd, 2023. So some of this, just a comment on it before it gets moved. Some of this has been happening informally. So I've spoken to the mayor of Gibson's, I've spoken to some folks at BC Ferries, as well as some other elected officials. And I kind of just wanted to put this above board and go into this with council support as we look to figure out either in the Islands Trust or in Metro or in West Vancouver, wherever it is, where some of the, from the standpoint of elected officials, where there's opportunities for advocacy.
And move the motion as stated.
So moved by Councillor Saunders, for second by Councillor Fast. Any discussion? Oh,
Did we expand it to include the Islands Trust?
yes, I see that as part of neighboring jurisdictions. Yes.
That was my question, was what was neighboring, because besides the Islands Trust, I think the Association of Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities is the provincial organization that is going to be meeting in Nanaimo in the second week of February.
Okay.
And that's for the Local Government Leadership Academy, the session, which is so good for us elected officials to go for professional development. And of course, right after an election, it's a especially good one. And I recommend looking through those, or I can help look through the resolutions they've made in the past, because they often, I believe, have made ones about ferries. So I can help look those up or whatever.
That'd be excellent. Yes,
Okay.
thank you. Thank you. Well taken.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? We'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, carries unanimously. Oh, point of order. I missed item 9.3, which was our CAO update.
Yes.
I was just,
My apologies.
it's quite all right. I don't have an extensive update. Really just wanting to touch base on capital projects and you know, we've been wrapping up a couple of projects which we talked about last time, and so the ones that are still on the go, and well, actually one that just wrapped up on Friday was the Harding Road culvert replacement, which was replaced with a bridge, which is far better for the environment. It allows for greater flow of water and better ecological integrity of the creek that flows through there, and so that's great, and we appreciate the patience and understanding of the neighborhoods and the community. There are 6 properties on the other side of that bridge, which were terribly inconvenienced during that snowy period where they had no access, vehicle access to their home. And so there is some finishing up work to be done with regrading the approaches to the bridge and some paving. But the all in all, it's gone quite well. So that's a good success story there. Well, And then the other large ongoing project, the community center. And you see a crew out there today. They're prepping the site to begin forming. And so I'm hopeful to see vertical growth on the site where we can start to see some framing going up. And following the framing will be positioning of some high-end blue posts and beams and some roofing structures. So, I'm not sure that we'll see all of that before the winter holidays, but that essentially is where we're at with that project. I think I did talk about the trees that posed a hazard the last meeting. So I'm seeing some nods and some shaking heads. So
The ones that fell down.
yeah, the ones that fell down. So those have yet to be removed, but that should be happening in the coming days or weeks. So but most of the other capital projects that I've been reporting on have either wrapped up or they're not advancing this time. So I don't have anything further.
Any questions for the CEO? Moving on to item 11.2, and it's update council on Metro Vancouver business. There hasn't been a meeting of Metro Vancouver, although I did receive our appointments to committees. So I've been appointed to the Climate Action Committee, the Electoral Area Committee, continuing former Councillor Hawkins' work there, as well as the Regional Parks Committee.
Can you say that again?
The Climate Action Committee, Electoral Area and Regional Parks.
Okay.
And I will turn it over on 11.3 to update the Council of Islands Trust business to our trustee staff and day.
Okay, I'm ready. Thank you. We had Islands Trust Council met by Zoom last week for 3 days, and I would like to congratulate Judy Getty has been elected as the to the governance committee, which is a fairly new committee elected by Trust Council.
It's going to be my news.
Oh, sorry. I wanted to congratulate you. Anyway, and I have been appointed to Trust Programs Committee. Most trustees are on some committee or another, but not all of them are elected. There's a discussion going on in the draft budget. So it was first looking like a 16.97% increase in the Bowen contribution. But just during the course of that meeting, it's down to 12.7% increase of the Bowen contribution. And if it goes like other years, we can expect it to keep going down because there's a lots of different things information that is still not known, like property assessments and things like that. The reason for the increase is mostly the provincial staff contract that was signed. So there's an increase in the Islands Trust staff or provincial staff. And so that was a Reese Harding, I wanted to mention. This is a part of our trustee orientation because we've got 30 First Nations, I believe, in the Islands Trust area. There's a certain amount of reconciliation training that new trustees are being oriented around and about the what this lawyer calls the Declaration Act, which some people know as DRIPA, the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. And so we had a good session about that. Local governments and Indigenous peoples, it's called. And so the recordings will be up. And there was some interesting material there, I think, that might pertain to Bowen. And then we had a bunch of other orientation materials, an interesting meeting. There's a lot of new trustees with new directions that they're proposing. But that's my report. And Judy may have things that she wants to talk about.
When we're going through that lengthy budget process, what's quite interesting is that the provincial government is paying the Islands Trust the princely sum of 180,000 a year into the budget, which is less than the Bowen contribution. And that's been consistent apparently for a number of years. And there's been suggestions that there be some sort of a struck to try and think of a strategy to instead of going begging with hat in hand, to come up with some sort of a strategy to increase that. It's based on because it's considered a regional planning function, then it's based on the population. But the planning function is to keep it rural and you know, the unique amenities of a rural and marine system. So it's kind of be a very interesting argument in terms of trying to build up what the strategy could be to try and increase that. So we're supposed to represent and provide an amenity for all of the members of the province, and yet the province contributes a really very nominal sum. So figuring out some way of possibly it's going to take striking yet another committee. And one of the things that the Bowen contribution is paid for is some of these new committees. So we have to have an accessibility committee that's mandated. We're trying to get a reconciliation committee up and starting because it's and I was going to write up an article about the lawyer's presentation. It's really quite interesting in terms of what the responsibilities of a municipal government have evolved through the courts and what we're going to end up with. And the governance committee, that was recommended with the governance review that they did last year. So the committees are expensive. And the Bowen allocation, we don't pay for planning. So our contribution to the other part of the function of the trust seems, the numbers are a little bit misleading. Is that 16% raise increase. We did find one of the things that brought us down was everybody got persuaded to bring more money out of surplus that could be used for the new committees. So that brought our share down. So as long as the new money that's found doesn't go into planning, which we don't pay for, then we benefit from new money somehow. It's working. It's very interesting, the whole process, but bit of a slog Wednesday was.
Especially with the meeting. Councilor Wade?
Was the Islands Trust created by the province? So, I mean, it just seems strange to me if this collection of islands are, you know, a child of a provincial measure, why they wouldn't support it or support it to the extent that all of us are.
It's a very good question, and it's one that in the previous term, the mayor and council were interested in, or mayor anyway was interested in approaching the province for more funding. But at that time, the governance review was underway, so it was kind of didn't seem like a good timing. But now, if we all work towards that through the work that needs to be done, I have some numbers in front of us which I can pass along to others. But the unrestricted provincial grant received by Islands Trust has been 180,000 for the last 8 years, and so this would be the 9th year coming up, and it represents 1.88% of the 2023-24 budget. So it's tiny. In the trust's first year of operations, the grant was 469,000, representing 16%.
What year was that?
That would have been back in 1974. 74. So it's been the proportion has been declining.
These are conversations that I think are really good to have, and I've had initial conversations with ministry staff about these types of issues. And to Councillor Getty's question about like what is the broader strategy, I think a key element to that is looking to the object of the trust, which is the primary rationale for the creation of the trust, which is preserve and protect the unique environmental and cultural aspects of the islands for not just the residents of the islands, but for all of British Columbia. That's the primary intent of the trust. And so I think that's a good rationale to start with as to why provincial contribution needs to remain strong. It is something that is on the provincial ministry staff's radar, and conversation continues.
Very good.
Councilor Morris?
The other prime reason, as far as I'm concerned, is all the assets that are held by the Islands Trust Conservancy are held for the province, and that's in the legislation, so they should be paying for the entire operation of the Conservancy.
Lots of good arguments to make, but I won't, I'm looking at the time. Anybody's welcome to contact us if you need more info. I'm speaking on Judy's behalf here, but.
All right, moving on to item 11.4, update on Translate. So there was a Mayor's Council meeting just last week. Some of the highlights were just the sharing of the 10-year priorities. And in that, just a note, Translate's looking to double bus service over current, so double service over current levels by 2035. A big portion of that is going to be bus rapid transit in the region, so traffic separated bus lanes. An interesting one, maybe for Bowen residents and North Shore residents, is they're looking to advance a business case for a traffic separated bus link between Park Royal and Metrotown. So going all the way over there. Also highlighted climate action, so corporate climate action. So in 2021, Translate committed to achieve net zero by 2050, an interim reduction of 45% from by 2030 from 2010 levels. So those are some of the big highlights. Moving on to item 11.5, moving to a closed council meeting. The recommendation that council move to a closed meeting immediately following the regular council meeting to discuss items pursuant to section 19 1A of the community charter, and A being personal information about an identifiable individual who holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employee, or agent of the municipality, or another position appointed by the municipality. Councilor Jurgensen? Moved by Councilor Jurgensen, seconded by Councilor Saunders. Any discussion? All in favor, raise your hand, say aye. Seeing none opposed, carried unanimously. And moving to item 13, question period. So question period is an opportunity for members of the public to request clarification or ask a follow-up question relating to an item discussed at the meeting. Questions must relate to an item on the agenda and be directed at the mayor. They're limited to 2 questions per speaker and must not exceed 3 minutes total. Are there any questions this evening for your council? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 14, which is adjournment. I'm going to have a motion to adjourn. Councilor Getty was at it first, seconded by Councilor Morris. Yes.
Did I miss the motion for closed?
Yes, you missed it.
You missed it.
I'm not sure where I apologize.